Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our Midrash for Parashat Nitzavim. And I have been chomping at the bit to get the Nitzavim since the Parashat series was dropped in my lap. And there's so much good information in Nitzavim that Ephraim needs to know, but doesn't know yet. And his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and they're also destroyed for lack of putting his knowledge into action. We're going to talk about all those things here in Parashat Nitzavim. Now, before we get started, we did have several very good questions came in, and I like to do the questions. They do take some time to respond to, but if we're teaching the truth and people are not understanding or comprehending or getting the truth, then we need to spend some time in correspondence. So we had some very good questions. We had the first question that came in. It says, very complimentary. It says, thank you, Brother Norman and team, for another great video and for all the hard work you put. Praise Yahweh. We're glad if it's helpful. I found this one to be especially rich from end to end. Praise Yah. It'd be good to know why. I've heard you state that the scribes or Sadducees were Karaites. That's correct. Though I've never considered this before, hearing your statements, that would make plenty of sense to me. He continues, I've been trying to verify that, but so far I've been unsuccessful. Do you have a source for that info or a study that I can look up on your website, perhaps? And that's a very good question. So just to tell you, I heard this from Nehemiah Gordon, who is, I don't know if he's not a leader of the Karaites, but he's certainly a very well-known Karaite. He directed me to the Karaite Corner website and to what they have, the history of Karaism. And so this is a screenshot from their website. You can see the URL at the top there. It says Karaism, this is their take. Karaism is the original Judaism. I can see why they would think that, which has existed throughout history under various names, including righteous or commandment keepers, tzaddikim, the Sadducees, tzaddikim. So a tzaddik is a commandment keeper, a righteous one, a righteous man. Boethusians, I believe that's in the Talmud, Ananites, I don't know where that's from, and Karaites, all of whom obeyed the Torah with no additions. So what they're saying here, this last part that's not highlighted is actually the most important part, all of whom obeyed the Torah with no additions. So what they're effectively saying is that they have a spirit that runs through all of these. It's the same spirit that manifests in different names, but their spirit is to stick only to the Tanakh, to the words of Elohim, and not to make up their own standards of righteousness, not to make up a Talmud and this kind of a thing. So just to do a quick review, so this is the first century Jewish sects that are found in the renewed covenant. So obviously we have the Pharisees, who are the, they changed their name to Orthodox in the Middle Ages. It's the same group of people. It's the same spirit, and they do make up their own standards of righteousness. So they're following the Zugot traditions, and that developed into the rabbinism that we have today. Then you have the Sadducees, or the Karaites, and there are some, to be clear, there are some differences between historical Sadducees and historical Karaites, and you will see disputes. People will say they are the descendants or they aren't the descendants, because there was about I'm not an expert on the subject, but about a 700-year gap in between the sect of the Sadducees and the sect of the Karaites. So the Sadducees did not survive the destruction of the second temple because they didn't know what to do without a second temple. Excuse me, not that they didn't survive it, but they didn't thrive following the destruction of the second temple because they didn't have a program to do other than the Tanakh, and it's hard to do when you're out in the exile. But the Rabbinites, of course, did have a program that they came up with. So then I guess you also had the Nazarene, the first century Nazarene sect, and then also the Hellenists, or similar to Reform Jews. But the question that I would have for our respectful brother is, why is this the question? Why are we focusing on this question? What's the point of this question? Why this? Why are you writing about this? We don't know you. So Yeshua tells us to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, of the rabbis and the Karaites. So my question would be, if you're going to write us questions, how does this question help you to enter into right relationship with the vine, to enter into right relationship with Yeshua? And how does it help you to get your reward for helping to build his kingdom? In other words, what does this question have to do with serving our king? So, what are our priorities here? Are we trying to serve our master? And I think this is one of the things that Ephraim just really needs to understand is that, again, we spent 1,260 years in Esau's house, and we've been out of Esau's house for a little over 500 years at this point. But we still have a lot of his traditions. We still wear his clothing, so to speak. A lot of people are not used to the Hebraic manner of assembling, the Hebraic manner of self-discipline. They still want the broad, easy church model road, just renamed Messianic Israel. And one of the problems that we know of is that we are still effectively on the far side of the Sambachan River. We're still effectively in Greco-Roman Babylonian thought processes, because these are thought-oriented languages, whereas Hebrew is an action-oriented language. So if we're lost in the Babylonian confused system, we will get some knowledge and we'll get all puffed up. We have some knowledge, so now we know what to do. Okay, but if we have love for Yahweh, we're going to take action in the Hebrew-oriented model, and this action is designed to edify or to build up the body. So what does this have to do with building up the body, brother? That's my question. What does this have to do with building up the body? Okay, good question. Just what does it have to do with building up the body? Okay, so question number 2. This was also very, very nicely worded, very respectful question. So he says, Shabbat Shalom. I'm not sure it's a native English speaker or if it's from another country. If you're from another country, praise Yahweh that we're reaching around the world here. He says, where do you all have Nazarenes meet on Shabbats? There are many Nazarenes, mixed communities around the globe when Nazarenes were persecuted in Jerusalem during the early church period. I met several such communities around some countries I traveled. Now, I'm going to take some issue with this here just for a moment. Now, brother, again, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you're from. I don't know if you are a regular watching these video series, or if this is the first time you've tuned in, or if you just have a question, you drop by, or I'm not sure where you're from. So it's a very nicely worded question. So I'm going to try and give you a very respectful but full response. I'm going to try and speak the truth in love. If you're talking about mixed communities, you're not talking about Nazarene communities unless you're talking about Acts chapter 6. But even when you're talking about Acts chapter 6, the Nazarenes have to be in charge. So we've talked about this before, but we'll talk about it again. We are effectively what you might call a deep startup cycle, effectively. So we've talked about this before. We hope to lay it out in the documentary upcoming, and perhaps we'll cover some of the details in the 13th month coming up here soon. But you're talking about mixed communities. So I don't quite understand. You change verb tenses, which if you're not a native English speaker, that's great that we're communicating. It says there are many Nazarenes, mixed communities. It's like, okay, no, around the globe when Nazarenes were persecuted in Jerusalem during the early church period. So, okay, so we talk about assemblies that were, when we're talking about the book of Acts, and we see Shaul and Barnabas going into the assemblies in the dispersion, this was prior to the imposition of the Birchat Haminim. So the Birchat Haminim death curse came sometime after the destruction of the Second Temple, or they believe sometime at least after Yeshua's death. You had Nazarenes continuing to come into the synagogues. You used to have just the synagogue of the city. So they used to teach from the Tanakh, and so you had the synagogue of the city. But now with the Birchat Haminim, we are no longer allowed in Orthodox Jewish synagogues. So we've covered this before. We'll hope to cover it again in the documentary. But then so you say, I have met several such communities around some countries I traveled. So I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if you're talking about home fellowships. I don't know if you're talking about Hebraically oriented churches. There's several Messianic ministries that I certainly would not call Nazarene because they don't organize. They don't have a kingdom vision. They have ministry visions, and they don't have a Yeshua vision. Okay, so now, if you're talking about mixed communities in the terms of Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, again, that would be different because you'd have to have the Hebrews or the Nazarenes teaching and the Hellenists or the Messianics learning and listening. So like this broadcast is effectively this model. So you have the Hebraically oriented teaching, and then the Hellenist is listening. Forgive the explanation, but we'll talk about this more. But it's the Hellenists don't stick to the model Yeshua prescribes. Now, he says, respectfully, he says, they all have to be connected together, and that's true. Now, he says, they are awaiting to worship in spirit, love, and in truth, which is Torah and the laws of Elohim. And, this brother, this sounds, I don't know, I looked up this brother's name. It seemed like it doesn't matter where he's from, but I like this question. I appreciated the question. I appreciated that he has a vision of the people wanting to come together, but I guess I just have to question how accurate is the perception, because what he's saying, yes, they do all have to be connected together. He says, but they're waiting to worship in spirit and in truth, but at what standard? Are they awaiting at a messianic standard, or are they awaiting at a Nazarene standard? Because it's what the people want makes a tremendous difference on where they search for teaching and fellowship. So we've talked about this. If you're a regular, I don't know how to say this. If you're new to the channel, then I can appreciate your question, and I think it'd be, if you just keep listening, you'll get the answer to your question. We've covered this several times already. But if you're a regular listener on the channel, then we've covered this several times already. So it's a question of taking this information and incorporating it and making it your own. So we've talked about this slide quite a bit, and because we in Israel, we've been given several chances. So we had the Garden of Eden, which we didn't want to hear and obey his voice. And then we left Egypt, and we didn't want to hear and obey his voice. And so now Yeshua came to show us, one like Moshe came to show us how to walk out the Torah. And things continued all right in the land of Israel. But as the faith moved outside the land of Israel and the great falling away took place, we don't want to obey his voice. We want to make up our own program, and that's Esav's game. So we fell first to Messianism and then to Christianity, and then we fell into Catholicism or universalism, Roman universalism, and Eastern Orthodoxy, which is closely related. And then we've broken away in the Protestant churches, and we've broken away from the independent pastors. And now people are meeting either in house churches or messianic house churches, or there are a few messianic assemblies. But you've got effectively, brother. I mean, we've talked about this many times. I don't know if you've been here or a regular, but what we have is we have messianic ministers who are promoting their own ministries, which is to say they are promoting their own kingdoms. And what Nazarene Israel's approach has been since the very beginning was to find a common doctrine upon which we can all come together, because that's ultimately what it comes down to, is if you're going to unite, what are you going to unite about? If you're not going to unite on his word, you might as well go back and unite with the Catholic Church, Father forbid, because they don't care about the Tanakh. And Brother Judah doesn't care about the Tanakh either, except insofar as it's a cover story for the Talmud. So if you're not going to unite on Yahweh's word, if you're not going to unite on Yeshua's word, what are you going to unite on, brother? What are you going to unite on? So I would ask, I mean, are these Nazarene assemblies that you've met, or are these messianic assemblies that you've met? Are these kingdom-focused ministries? As far as I know, Nazarene Israel is the only one. Or are these messianic minister-focused ministries? And the way you can tell the difference is the Jude 3 test. So are they obeying Jude verse 3? Is it the faith once delivered for all the saints, or is it something else? So we've covered this. We're going to cover it again this week, just because, again, this is seems to be a continuing common question for the house of Ephraim. But we're going to have to get this resolved. We're going to have to unite on the original faith. We're going to have to unite on Jude verse 3, or there won't be any unity. And the reason why is that in Scripture, according to the way Yahweh looks at the world, your faith is your nation. So effectively, you have your Pharisees and your Sadducees. Those are two different nations. Your Pharisees, your Sadducees, and your Nazarenes, those are three different nations. So today, if you were to take a look at the land of Israel, you would have many different nations, and they unify them through a Babylonian superstructure called democracy. And then same for the United States. I mean, the United States, you have other faiths entirely. You have many different faiths, a plurality of faiths. So, and again, they unify them by the red horse democratic Babylonian superstructure. So what we have to do here is we have to effectively cross the Sambachan River. We have to leave behind the Greco-Roman Babylonian thought-oriented thought process. We have to adopt the true Hebraic action-oriented thought process, so that when we say we worship Yeshua, when we say we follow Yeshua, we're actually imitating Yeshua. We're not just adoring Yeshua, but we're actually imitating Yeshua. We're walking as Yeshua walked. So, I appreciate your question. Definitely, truly, they all have to be connected together. Absolutely. And Yeshua gives us a model to do that. And we'll talk about that in the Brit Chadasha section. And he says, they are awaiting to worship in spirit, love, and in truth, in the Torah and the laws of Elohim. So I guess I really have to ask you, brother, I don't understand your thought process. I think I might understand it, but it's kind of from a red horse framework. So is it clear that what Nazarene Israel is offering is effectively a theological framework into which people can plug themselves? And you have this all the time. You have, for example, American culture is sort of a framework, and you can plug yourself in. If you study, work, do whatever, and we're going to bypass all the modern day political discussions, that's a framework. The state of Israel, that's a framework. If you meet certain criteria, certain specifications, they will allow you in the country, and you're allowed to operate within their framework. Okay, well, those are both Babylonian frameworks. What we're offering here in Nazarene Israel is a Hebraically oriented framework. So the Catholic Church is a Babylonian framework. The Protestant Church is a Babylonian framework. The Messianic house church movement is a Babylonian framework. And what we're offering here, this has been the result of my studies since 57, 59, or 1999. And what we're offering is the original framework of the Tabernacle of David. But the thing is, it's just like any other framework. You have to enter in. You have to make the effort. You have to put forth the work. So what we are hoping to do is to restore and reestablish the Tabernacle of David, the original first century faith. That has been the goal of Nazarene Israel all along. But the problem is, it's just like anything else. If you love Yahweh and want to serve him, you have to take it upon yourself to make offerings and give sacrifices of yourself, of your life, of your time. You have to dedicate yourself. You have to give of yourself. For example, when you come up to the temple 3 times a year, you don't make the Levites come chase you down for your tithe. If you love Yahweh and you fear Yahweh, you bring your tithe. So you do what you can. It's a very active model. It's like every man is supposed to bring his A game. Every man is supposed to bring his first and his finest in order to honor the king and to build the glory and the grandeur of his empire until it encompasses the whole earth. That's the whole goal. It's not just to live a nice life in the blessings of Yeshua. It's a framework for making sacrifices in an orderly way that helps build Elohim's eternal kingdom, that builds Yeshua's kingdom. So the problem I have is it sounds like just the tone of the blue and the yellow portions, just the tone sounds like to me, like you're trying to put the burden of responsibility on me or on Nazarene Israel. And I guess I just can't accept that, because effectively what you're saying is these people are here, They are waiting. What are you doing? Why are you not serving their needs? Why are you not bringing them together? And I guess it's kind of like the thing, if you were a Levitical priest, are you supposed to like run down to Shechem and, you're supposed to go to Dan, you're supposed to go to Beersheba, and you're supposed to chase the people down and that's not the priesthood's job. Yeah, that's the kingship's job, but we don't have a kingship per se in the dispersion. In the dispersion, we work only by attraction. We don't bear the sword in the dispersion. We don't bear the sword again until after we come back home after Armageddon. So right now, we only can work through attraction. And what we are seeking to do is to attract those people who already love Yahweh enough, who already have Yeshua's spirit or who want to receive it, who want to hear, they're hungry. This was so hard. This one brother told me, he says, the hardest thing to remember is that the ministry is not to the needy, it's to the hungry. And I wrestled with that for years. That's still a hard saying. Yes, we clearly have to be connected together, but are the people hungry? Are the people, do they want to build Yeshua's kingdom? Do they want to build Yeshua's fame? Do they want to bring the stick of Ephraim together so that we can all survive the tribulation and go home? Because if they are, why are they making the priesthood chase them down? Okay, why are people not, forgive me, I don't know, I hope I don't have ivory tower syndrome or something, but it's like, why are the people not interested? Why are the people not getting involved? Because what it seems like is that most people are protecting their life, their time, their money. They're trying to save their life in this world, and that's how come they're going to lose it. And what I'm trying to say, and I get all kinds of flack for it, it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to say is we have to get involved. We have to take the initiative. We have to say, hey, I need to do right by Yahweh. He's the great king. I need to be in his favor. And we need to take that initiative. So for the past 25 years, wow, our goal has been to reestablish what are we supposed to be doing here? How do we build Yeshua's kingdom? How do we get in his favor? And anyway, that's a whole long story. But so my point is it clear that Nazarene Israel is offering a framework so that those who are waiting to worship in spirit and love and in truth can tithe and enter in? Because that's what it is. It's not, and there's so many people. It's like they have this free sacrifices mentality, free, they're going to make free sacrifice. They're just going to offer the bulls of their lips. And they expect there to be buildings and ministers and ministries and all the things that money supports. And then no one wants to contribute. It's like, okay, so we're supposed to provide ministries and all this stuff. And it's just like, it's way more work than what you would think. It is way more work than what, especially to make it right and to make it integrated and to make triple dog sure that it matches scripture. That is not easy. So we already have a huge job, brother. We have an enormous responsibility here. What we need is the backup of the people. And, the question I'd like to bring out is, do people want to see Yeshua's kingdom built? And do people realize that it takes everyone to build a kingdom? It takes a nation to build a kingdom. And what it sounds like, just in the context of this blue and yellow text, is that you're trying to put that burden on us. It's like it's our job to motivate you to get up off your throne, to bring your tithe and your time to glorify and honor Yeshua within a framework that is what he commanded. And we don't understand how come that's our responsibility. We're already offering the framework. I don't even know how many, 90, 100 hours a week. I wake up, I work, and when I run out of gas, I go to bed. That's my life. And I'm happy. I'm thrilled. But we're just so maxed out here. Take a look at the bags under my eyes. It's just unbelievable. The workload here, people don't understand. And they're waiting for us to do it all for them. Okay, if people are truly wanting worship in spirit and truth, then why don't they follow the truth? Why don't they tithe? Why don't they enter the kingdom? Why don't they do what Scripture says to do and not make us chase them? I don't get it. So I'm trying to speak the truth in love as I understand it. But this is what I see is a lot of people, a lot of messianic red horse spirits trying to put the burden on us to get out from under what they're supposed to be doing. And that's just not right. It's just not fair. And it's not pleasing to Elohim. So, and then you get this other thing we talked about before with the spirit of Asaph, people wanting us to establish a new framework. And that's never been what Nazarene Israel is about. There's all these, if you want to find a messianic ministry that wants to promote their own framework, that wants to make up their own thing, just take a look. There's all kinds of messianic ministers, all kinds of messianic ministries. I don't know any one of them. I've been looking for other people who love Yahweh. I've been looking for other people who want to obey Yeshua. Can't find them. Yahweh has blessed us with a few handfuls of people and more interest all the time, praise Yah. And we are hopeful. We know that this movement is going to grow starting in a year or two. We know that. We know from prophecy. We have all confidence it's going to come true. But again, it's like you're wanting us to do something other than what Scripture says to do. And we're saying, no, we have to do what Scripture says to do. And so do you. And part of your job, okay, I mean, I'll say it again. I was badly injured in the service. So I do draw a pension. I donate the whole thing to the ministry, and probably about a third of it ends up being spent on my upkeep. And so I give all to give all. And I pray that Yahweh will show me if I step off the pathway. And I love that. That's my life. I love it. And what I'm asking is not for other people to give all necessarily. I'm asking for other people to obey the Torah and the laws of Elohim. I'm asking them to obey the Torah of the tithe. I'm asking them to obey the Torah of organization. I'm asking them to obey what Scripture says to do. And we're going to talk all about that in this week's Parashah. So I don't know if people have taken the time to think about the Beatitudes and how they apply to everyday life and to doctrine and these kinds of things. But Yeshua tells us plainly, he says, if you hear my sayings and you do what I say, you're going to be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. You're going to have rain and you're going to have floods in this life. And you're going to have winds. And you're going to have thieves. You're going to have all kinds of problems. They're going to beat on the house. But if you're founded on the rock, it's not going to fall. If you're doing everything Yeshua said to do, you're founding your life on Yeshua's kingdom, he's going to see you through. You're going to have trials. You're going to have challenges. But if you're founding your life on Yeshua and his words, his teachings, his commandments, you're going to be supported through it all. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine, and he hears them, he reads them, he studies them, he talks all about them, he watches videos on them, he does word studies on them, but he doesn't do them. Okay, he's not going to do the Jude 1 and verse 3 faith. He's not going to keep the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. He's going to do his own thing. He's going to make up his own worship program. He's going to worship as an independent family in his own home. Well, he shall be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And you're going to have problems in life and you're going to fall. And great will be the fall if you think you're serving Yeshua, but you're not. Because who is he talking to here in the Beatitudes? He's talking to his followers. We think all the time, as a child in the Christian church, they would teach us that this applies to the Gentiles who are not following Yeshua at all. He's not who he's talking to. He's talking to those people who think they're following him, but they're not actually following him. Bear that thought in mind. So I really appreciate the kind tone of this brother. It was a respectful question. I just think we need to reflect on things from Yahweh's perspective if we want Yahweh's ultimate blessings. And I know that there's always some people who are offended when I say these things, and I to those people, not necessarily the question writer, have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Brothers and sisters, we are coming into the hardest time in all of Israel's history. Have I become your enemy because I'm telling you these things? There's a lot of people, they don't want to hear this message on both sides, on both houses. It doesn't matter. My job is to tell you. Your job is also to enter in. Okay, I am entering into relationship with Yeshua. Your job is to enter into relationship with the vine. Okay, there has to be, we have to become cells in the same plant. We all become responsible for each other. And we can do things the easy way, or we can do things the hard way. We can do things the protected way, or we can get whacked. So anyway, I do want to encourage this brother, but just discussing things, we talk about everything. So my assistant, Rivka, she had some comments. She was in a bit of a hurry. She had many things to do. She works very hard, a lot of long hours. So she says, well, we do, and just kind of, I hope I'm going to express this correctly. She says, well, we do want unity and the stick to come together. So it seems like a good question, except we've had people who outright tell us, they say they don't even believe in the doctrine we teach. They don't believe Nazarene Israelite doctrine, when our whole goal is to recreate what Scripture says. But they insist that we should pay them basically to tell us what to do, to boss us around. And those people also are willing to unite without agreement on the doctrine. And if you knew my assistant, I mean, that's a constant reference. It's like, what sense does that make? It's like, is that an insane thing? How can you unify without agreement on the doctrine? And that's especially true if you're coming from a non-Babylonian point of view. Because from a Babylonian point of view, sure, you have Pharisees, Sadducees, you could have everybody. You know what I'm saying? You have, that's the promise of a Babylonian government. We just all link arms, we sing, we are the world, and then we just all get along. Except it doesn't really work like that, because we're not taking Elohim into account. So a different doctrine is a different faith. A different faith is a different nation. So that's the goal, is for the entire nation to be of the correct faith. So this concept that people are willing to unite without agreement on the doctrine automatically tells us that they're Babylonian. That's a Babylonian spirit. And so we haven't used names because we want to leave people an opportunity to repent and come to the truth and come to the light. So she continues, she says, and when we ask, what do they find wrong with Nazarene Israel doctrine? We've been working on this for 25 years now. What's wrong with it? And they answer nothing. They can't respond. They just want to be in charge. If they're in charge, great, but they don't want to submit. They don't want to serve. They want to rule. That's the Babylonian spirit. She says, so there's no real desire to change or to unify on the true doctrine that Scripture teaches. And that isn't real unity. That's absolutely right. She continues, so this is what we're facing, is a bunch of rebellious sects or rebellious spirits who don't want to submit to Yahweh's way and who want to do things all their own way, the red horse way, meaning whatever seems good and right in their eyes. They just don't want to unite on the true doctrine that Scripture teaches. And she repeats, she's like, they come to us asking to unite without uniting on doctrine, which to her is like just insane. She says, I'm not sure if anything here is helpful. And that's basically what we're dealing with, is we're dealing with Babylonian spirits that don't want to submit to Yahweh's way. No matter what you say, they're not going to be happy with doing things Yahweh's way. So right now, that's more than 99% of the movement. Our prayer, we believe from Scripture, that we will get that down to 90%, and that there will be a 10% that wants to do things Yahweh's way. So again, we can't really get into mixed communities unless you're talking about the Acts chapter 6 model, and I haven't seen any. So, okay, I hope that answers your question. It was a good question, and thank you for your respectful tone. But Nazarene Israel has to stay focused on purity. Someone's got to do it. Someone's got to survive. Someone's got to form the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim, according to all that Elohim says. So if people want to take part in that, there's so much that we could do together. You can build a global alliance. You can build a global assembly if you have the participation, if you have the involvement. And what a grand witness for Yeshua it would be. So let's come now to our third question. And this one made me laugh. He says, do you believe the Golden Age government is going to hand over all non-Orthodox to Talmudic law via the Noahide law? And yes, absolutely. That's what they say. He says, please don't block me. Brother, I don't know why I would block you, but you called it the Golden Age government. I'm like, I can't imagine. We're talking about there's going to be a period of 20 years and 10 months that corresponds to the half-hour silence in heaven. We'll see if it's silent on earth. Just because it's silent in heaven doesn't necessarily mean that it's silent on earth. And this is with the raising of the 144,000. I want to give you a very complete answer to this, but we don't have time to unpack it here. We're going to unpack that in the documentary. We want to finish a year's worth of the Parashiot first. We might cover some of it in the 13th month. You'll have to let me pray about that and see what Yahweh says. But you say, do you believe the Golden Age government is going to hand over? Levy is going to think of it as a Golden Age, but we're not going to think of it as a Golden Age because the Talmudic age is going to be a terrible, terrible, terrible time for all of us. Do you believe the Golden Age Talmudic government is going to hand over all non-Orthodox to Talmudic law via the Noahide law? They say they will. I legitimately want to know where your mindset is on this. What I hear you say is that this is a distinct possibility, and absolutely. So here, we've talked about this before. Again, I don't know if you watch the series, don't watch the series. If you're just popping in, I'm not sure. But go to Wikipedia and look up the Birchat Haminim. It's written in Wikipedias. It's fairly thick, but you can make it out, and the stuff that you need is up near the top. So it says, now this is a prayer. This is a death curse that Orthodox Judah, Levi, prays over us 3 times each weekday, 18 times a week, 936 times each year. If they're a practicing Orthodox Jew, they're praying for our death. Okay, what does that say? So for the apostates, let there be no hope. Wipe us out and uproot the kingdom of arrogance speedily and in our days. They're talking about Yeshua's kingdom. May the Nazarenes, meaning Nazarenes, Messianics, Christians, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, you name it, anyone who believes in Yeshua in any form, and the sectarians, who are talking about the Karaites, the conservative, the secular Jews, everybody else, perish as in a moment. Let them be blotted out of the book of life and not be written together with the righteous who study Talmud. Mercy's sakes, give me a break. You are praised, O Adonai, who subdues the arrogant. The arrogant meaning the ones who stick to the Tanakh instead of graduating to the Talmud or whatever it is that they think. So that continues, the next paragraph in the article says, this is embedded in a baraita, or an entry of the tractate on blessings, meaning Talmud Tractate Berachot, 28b through 29a. So that's the back side of the 28th page or leaf, and the front side of the 29th leaf, written during the Mishnaic period. And Yeshua lived in the early Mishnaic period. So yeah, this is what they want. This is the whole point of the Talmud, is to kill Joseph, basically. So we've talked about this. Again, I don't know if you watch the rest of the series, and I recommend, this is information that everyone needs to know, or I wouldn't be spending so many hours on it each week. But this is information you need to know. So yes, they want to, and it's going to take time to unpack all this. But yes, there's an ancient, if you check the parashah on Vayeshev, that should give you some background. There's 2 or 3 parashiot right there in a series that will give you the core of what's really going on. So Yeshua came to bring back Joseph. And Judah doesn't like that. Levi doesn't like that. So they hate Yeshua and anyone who believes on Yeshua, because it would force them to give up the Tanakh, or excuse me, give up the Talmud and go back to the Tanakh. So they absolutely don't want that. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the fallen watchers of Genesis 6. But this is from May 9th, 2014. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu has already said that the Talmud, which calls for the death of all Nazarenes, will be the basis of Israeli law. So half hour of silence in heaven is not going to be a fun time. Here's the Arutz Sheva article on May 9th, 2014. You can read all about it there. And still praying. So we are here, just a Parashah update, barley update. So we're here on the 48th week, Parashat Nitzavim, been chomping at the bit to get to this one. And then we have 3 more in this annual cycle. Then we have 4 parashiot, because we're going to have a 13th month this year. We're just now entering the 12th month. There is no barley yet. Right now they're seeing the anemones, which are, if you know what a crocus is, it's kind of like a crocus. The crocuses are one of the first things to come up. And once you see the crocus, then you know the rest of the trees will start to bud in about a month. So they're starting to see the anemones now. So probably certainly we will have a 13th month. We'll talk about other questions. Probably wouldn't go to a 14th month. That is hypothetically possible. We just have to see. That's just all. We just have to wait and see. Probably we'll see it in this 13th month. So then we will have 7 more portions to start the year, and then we're going to switch to the documentary series. So we'll have to pray real hard about what's going to go in these 4 weeks here, but we might cover a lot of this information, because it's a very, very good question, and people need to know what's going on. So what's going to happen during the tribulation? So I think a lot of that, brother, quite frankly, depends on us. And we're going to talk about that in this parashah. Those of us who get involved in Yeshua's program, those of us who get involved in building Yeshua's kingdom, will survive. And those who don't get involved in building Yeshua's kingdom in a real way won't. There's many scripture quotations that say that. The question is just simply, do we believe them? So, if you want to know what my mindset is on this, my mindset basically is that the only way to survive is to do what Elohim says. That's it, because he promises to wipe out Esau, and we're trying to come out of Esau, and I don't think we've really made it out yet to the point we'd like to think that we have. I know it's not a popular point of view, but I'd rather people survive than be happy with me. So my opinion is that survival is hidden under the rock called faithful obedience. That's why most people never find it, because both Judah and Joseph, we got other things we'd rather do than faithfully obey our Maker. Now, this letter was such a blessing. It's not really a question. It was more of a comment that a sister made when she tithed. And we're going to leave her anonymous so she gets her full reward. But she says, I love this verse to remind myself as I give my tithe in gratitude and awe of Yahweh. So Devarim 8 and verse 18 says, you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, amen, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is this day. So he's confirming his covenant because she's entering into the covenant. She's keeping the harder commandments in addition to the less hard commandments. I don't know this sister, but she's tithing. She's giving back to the kingdom. She's not just taking what's easy and free. So she continues. She says, I'm focused on calculating as accurately as I can my proper tithe. Praise Yah. And last month I was able to do more than the previous month. Praise Yah. Amen, sister. Praise Yah. So she says SSDI, which is a disability income, and then we're not really worried about the numbers. But what we're thankful for, look at the heart of this sister. She's thankful to enter into relationship with Yahweh. She's saying, thank you, Brother Norman, Rivka, Oscar, and family for the work you're doing for Yah and Yeshua's kingdom. Amen. It's a blessing. She says, very grounding parashah yesterday. I get so grateful in how Elohim blesses me. I think I'm following instructions properly, yet sometimes I'm not. So repetition and reminders within the framework of the big picture are very helpful for me and sobering. She says, thank you. And praise Yahweh, sister. Just look at the heart of this sister. So she's not saying, how come you don't provide more services? She's saying, thank you, Yahweh. I know I didn't realize that I wasn't exactly in right relationship with Yahweh. My heart is to be in right relationship with Yahweh. So thank you for letting me know so I can make the changes. That's the kind of spirit that we need to see much more of in Ephraim. And it reminded me of 2 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 6. So Shaul's talking about people who are going to give to help further the kingdom. And it's all voluntary, but Yahweh watches everything. And if we don't volunteer, he's not pleased. He says, this I say, he who sows sparingly into Yeshua's kingdom will also reap sparingly. And he who sows bountifully into Yeshua's kingdom will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, because we're in the dispersion. We're working through attraction. We're under the order of Melchizedek, because Elohim loves a cheerful giver. And that's just what we were so blessed in this, by this sister's comments, is that it's clear she's cheerful to give because she knows that's what it takes to bring her into right relationship with Yahweh Elohim. That brings her into right relationship with the vine and with her maker. So we were so blessed. Verse 8, and Elohim is able to make all favor abound toward you. And sister, we pray that Elohim will make all favor abound toward you and all the others whose heart is to support and help build and grow Yeshua's kingdom. It says that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, so Yahweh is going to provide for you, may have an abundance for every good work. And praise Yahweh, you're tithing in support of this work. Verse 9, as it is written, he has dispersed abroad, he's given to the poor, his righteousness or his commandment keeping endures forever. Verse 10, now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes thanksgiving through us to Elohim. And what this means is because you're helping to provide for Yahweh's work, you're helping us to get the word out there. Look at all the thanksgiving it causes. We're thankful. We're just so blessed by your letter. And the thanksgiving abounds. Verse 12. For the administration of this service not only supplies the needs of the saints so we can help spread and further and grow the kingdom, but also is abounding through many thanksgivings to Elohim. And we're so thankful to, what I want is to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. That's what I want. And so that's what we're seeking here. But it's just so uplifting when you get a letter from someone that's like, oh, I didn't know, I didn't realize, of course I want to do the right thing. And then they do. And that's what I would like to show to the brother who's saying, where do you all meet for Sabbath? Where do you all enter in? And we can have, it's up to Yahweh. It's up to Yahweh, but we can provide much more services and we can do much more good for glorifying Yeshua's name if the people will take the responsibility for entering in, as this sister is entering in, to help confirm the covenant. So the administration of this service not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also is abounding through many thanksgivings to Elohim, while through the proof of this ministry, they glorify Elohim for the obedience of your confession to the good news of Mashiach and for your liberal sharing with them and all men. And so what I'd like to say is to those brothers who are and sisters who are writing us and saying, can you provide this service? Can you provide that service? Notice what this sister is saying, and these people are not supporting. And this sister is saying, thank you so much for this service, this is where I need to give back to Yahweh. So can we see the difference? So verse 14, and by their prayer for you, and I ask everyone please to pray for this sister and for all the tithers and all the donors, all the supporters, by their prayer for you who long for you because of the exceeding favor of Elohim in you, thanks be to Elohim for his indescribable gift. And what is that indescribable gift? That indescribable gift is that we have the ability to enter into relationship with him. We failed many, many times now, but he still gives us that opportunity to enter into relationship with him, to please him. And he shows us how that can be done. And one of the things that we know is that in order to please him, we have to follow his Torah. And his Torah requires an organized nation. So the Midrash themes for Nitzavim is that Yahweh called all of our tribes, both houses together, as a single nation with him. And he called us into covenant with him, not as a gaggle, not as a mob, not as a mass of individuals, but as an ordered nation with functions and offices of government. Another thing we're going to see is that even though in the renewed covenant we all receive his spirit as individuals, there's yet a corporate action to take. That's because Yeshua tells us to build him a literal kingdom in his absence. That's what the parable of the minas is all about. Now, notice we're going to see, we've seen this before, we're going to see it again. His body is the same thing as to say the Tabernacle of David, which is the same thing as to say the stick of Joseph, which effectively, because it's being led by the sect of the Nazarenes, it's the same thing as to say the sect of the Nazarenes, the faith once delivered for all of the saints. We're also going to see in Nitzavim that Yahweh says he will bring Ephraim and those of Judah attached to Ephraim from the farthest parts of the earth, the farthest reaches away from Israel. But he's only going to bring us home if we are obeying the full instructions of Mashiach Nagid, who, according to Daniel 9 and verse 26, came at the end of the Second Temple period. He's the one. He came to show us how to live the Torah of Moshe, not as individuals, not as a flock, not as a gaggle, not as a mob, but as a nation. Okay, and we're also going to see in this parashah, if we obey the full instructions of Mashiach Nagid, we get to come home. Our name is Ephraim. If we don't obey the full instructions, if we're waiting for people to serve us, if we're sitting on our thrones waiting to be served, our name is Esav, and Esav will perish. So we come now to the Torah portion, and we come to Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 29, starting in verse 10. And I'm going to do the southern version here. It says, all of y'all stand today before Yahweh or Elohim. Okay, it's atem, it's the plural form. So all of y'all, okay, the group, the whole, everybody, the nation, all the tribes, both houses, all of y'all, all of Israel's children, plus the mixed multitude, you're standing today before Yahweh your Elohim. So you need to be straight. Okay, you're standing, we're talking about the leaders and the leaders of the tribes, we're talking about your elders, your officers, all the men of Israel, including your families, including your little ones, your wives, also the stranger who is within your camp, from the one who cuts your wood to the one who draws your water, from high to low, from top to bottom, from A to Z. We're talking about everyone in the nation is being called into the covenant as an ordered nation. That means that the principle and precept is we need to organize. If we don't come into Torah as a nation, we don't come into Torah at all. Verse 12, that you all may enter into covenant with Yahweh your Elohim and into his oath, which Yahweh your Elohim makes with you today as a nation, as a people, as an ordered group. Verse 13, that he may establish you all today as a people for himself, not a bunch of individuals, but as a people, that he may be Elohim to you all, just as he has spoken to you all. and just as he has sworn to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Okay, it will be a nation. Verse 14, he says, I make this covenant and this oath not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today before Yahweh our Elohim. So not just one individual, but all y'all, as well as with him who is not here with us today, but will come. All of y'all. It's a covenant for y'all. It's an oath for us all. Verse 16. And we have things to be careful of, brethren. He says, for you know that we dwelt in the land of Egypt, and that we came through the nations which you passed by. And you saw their abominations and their idols which were among them, wood and stone and silver and gold. And just as a note, we spent 1,260 years in the house of Asaph. So we got well soaked in their abominations and their idols. We need to come out. Verse 18. So that there may not be among you a man or a woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away from Yahweh our Elohim, to go and serve the Elohim of these nations by performing their rituals, whether you're aware that's what you're doing or not, that there may not be among you a root bearing bitterness or wormwood. And if we're focusing on the Elohim of these nations, we're going to be filled with gall, bitterness, and wormwood, because we're not rejoicing at the fact of being in connection with Yeshua, because we're focusing on the wrong things, because idols, Yahweh's not going to coexist with idols. Verse 19. And so it may not happen when he hears the words of this curse, okay, this is Ephraim, pay attention, that he blesses himself in his heart, Judah also, saying, I shall have peace, even though I follow the dictates of my heart. I'm doing what seems good and right in my own eyes, and Yahweh's going to bless me, as though the drunkard could be included with the sober. Okay, let's read that again, because we need it to sink in. And so it may not happen when either Ephraim or Judah hears the words of this curse, that any one of us blesses himself in his heart, saying, everything's going to go great for me, even though I'm doing what I think is right, which is different from what Yahweh thinks is right. Yahweh says it's not to be. So we've talked before about how in Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 28 and verse 1, Yahweh speaks about how he's going to bring down the drunkards of Ephraim. They're spiritually drunk. They're not paying attention to his spirit. They're paying attention to what they want, and they're blessing themselves in their hearts, saying, we don't have to enter into covenant. We don't have to tithe. We don't have to organize. Everything's going to be good. And tomorrow, even much more so. So we talked before about the ritual of taking off the shoe when someone doesn't want to build up his brother's house. So Devarim, or Deuteronomy 25 and verse 9, tells us, so it shall be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. Judah is cursing Joseph. Judah doesn't want Joseph to come back home. Judah doesn't want Ephraim's house built up. Judah will stick with Judah, but Judah won't stick up for Ephraim. Ephraim won't even stick up for himself. Ephraim won't join together, won't join a brotherhood, won't do the things that Yahweh wants us to do in order to become a people. And this is what needs to change, brothers and sisters. Ephraim needs to start building up his own house, because we are in the driver's seat. The ball is in our court, so to speak, and we need to take that ball and run with it. Now, right now, I hope to speak the truth in love, but my assistant suggested this dereliction of duty, which is a deliberate failure to do what you should do, particularly when it's part of your job. Okay, when you don't do what you're supposed to do, that's dereliction of duty. It's non-performance. Well, how do we get here? Okay, so Yahweh called me to the Messianic movement in 57, 59, or 1999. And at that time, it's a long story, but there were there was one large Messianic organization. It was at that time breaking into two parts. And I was very interested. I knew I had not done what I should have done earlier in my life. So I was very keen on doing as much as I could for Yahweh. So, long story short, I ended up getting involved in the inner circle between this large Messianic organization and another organization that was breaking away from it. And you had size 72 font, multicolor highlighter. You had flame wars going back and forth between the alleged leaders of these alleged Messianic organizations. And I'm like, really? You're kidding me, right? Okay, well, so you had the leaders were fighting, you had the leaders were brawling, and you had also the people were tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. My mom taught me, my dad said, my rabbi taught me, my pastor, he told us, well, I think, when no scripture is of any private interpretation. So we had the movement was just filled with unclean doctrines. And it just became very clear to me that if we were going to unite, we were going to have to unite on doctrine. And that once, as we learned what that doctrine was, then of course we had to start enacting it. And the ministry got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the more I made the point that we need to obey scripture to the Messianic world, the ministry got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So, and here we are today. We have a Messianic movement. We have a sister, just for example, who's like, "Oh, thank you. That's what I need to be doing." So she's worrying about her own business. She's taking care of her own things. And then we have others trying to place the burden on us because they don't want to do what the renewed covenant says to do. We've explained many, many times what the renewed covenant says to do. And you hear crickets, crickets, crickets from every quarter, except for a few handful of people. And the knowledge that we're going to grow. But at the minute, we still have a lot in the house of Ephraim and the house of Judah who believe that they're going to have peace even though they do what they want. They're looking for some way to replace the commandments because they want to make up their own commandments. And they're spiritually drunk and they think they're going to be included in the ingathering with the sober. And they're not, because their heart is still effectively in Esau. Yahweh's not going to spare Esau. Verse 20 says, Yahweh would not spare him. For then the anger of Yahweh and his jealousy, because he wants all of our attentions, would burn against that man. And every curse that is written in this book would settle on him. And Yahweh would blot out his name from under heaven. Verse 21. And Yahweh would separate him from all the tribes of Israel for adversity, according to all the curses of the covenant that are written in this book of the Torah. If you think about how fearsome that is, verse 22, he says, so that the coming generation of your children who rise up after you and the foreigner who comes from a far land would say, when they see the plagues of that land and the sicknesses which Yahweh has laid upon it, the whole land is brimstone, salt, and burning. It is not sown, nor does it bear, nor does any grass grow there, like the overthrow of Sodom and Amorah, Admah and Zeboim, which Yahweh overthrew in his anger and his wrath. All the nations would say, why has Yahweh done so to this land? Why does the heat of this great anger mean? Then the people would say, because they've been treating him just like the Messianic movement treats him today. They think they're keeping Torah, but the reality is they've forsaken the covenant of Yahweh Elohim of their fathers, which he made them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. And just to say it, if you are an Ephraimite, or if you are part of Judah attached to the house of Ephraim, and you are in the dispersion, you are not under the Levitical order. You are not under the Levitical covenant. You are under the order of Melchizedek. You are under Yeshua's renewed covenant until such time as we come back to the land of Israel after Armageddon. Verse 26, he says, "For we, Ephraim, went and served other Elohim and worshiped them, Elohim that we did not know and which Yahweh did not tell us to worship." He didn't give us those Elohim to worship. Verse 27, "Then the anger of Yahweh was aroused against this land to bring on it every curse that is written in this book." Again, we're not talking Torah Sheba'al Peh. We're not talking the oral Torah, which is a fiction. We're talking about the Torah that's written in the Torah of Moshe. Verse 28, "And Yahweh uprooted them from their land in anger, in wrath, and in great indignation, and cast them into another land, as it is to this day." Verse 29, just as an aside, "The secret things belong to Yahweh our Elohim, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this Torah." And Judah's always trying to work in the secret realm. Judah's trying to clean up Chaldean Kabbalah. Judah's trying to clean up demonism. Judah's trying to clean up the Tibetan Book of the Dead, when this strictly prohibited. Everything that we do in Nazarene Israel, the Revelation study, Father willing, we're going to show you more documentaries. These are all things which are revealed to us. Okay, if you're one of the people, and we've met a lot of very well-meaning people, and they want to get into Kabbalah, they want to get into these more sewed, hidden realms. Why? Why do that? Okay, it's the revealed things which are given to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of Yahweh's Torah. Okay, maybe we can apply our minds to learning this secret and that secret. No, we need to focus on doing Yahweh's Torah. This is what he wants us to do in order for him to be happy with us. Now, this to me is written almost perfectly for Ephraim. I don't know what Judah does with this, but Devarim, or Deuteronomy 30 and verse 1, speaking primarily of the house of Ephraim, it says, "Now it shall come to pass, when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where Yahweh your Elohim drives you due to your disobedience." And so this is what we've seen. Put Egypt there. Probably there was some, I don't know if there was some outgrafting in Egypt. There was certainly ingrafting. There was a mixed multitude that came up. There's also an Assyrian diaspora, which is still just beginning to end in our time these days. There was a Babylonian exile for Judah, and 90% of Judah never came home. And they ended up being attached. The 90% of Judah that didn't come home ended up attached to the house of Ephraim. Then you had the Roman exile, which ended in 1948. And then Jews have always been active in trade or commerce. And so this is how these promises to Abraham would be fulfilled, that his genetics would become part of every family, every tribe, every nation, every clan, every tongue, every people over the face of the whole earth. And then it just remains to be seen which ones respond to his call in Messiah Yeshua. Verse 2. "So when you're at the farthest reaches of the earth," which is where we are, if you put land of Israel in the center, and we're at the farthest reaches, and you return to Yahweh your Elohim and obey his voice, he says it all the time, "according to all that I command you today," not part of it, not half of it, "you and your children, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, being cheerful givers to help raise up Yeshua's kingdom," because you know it's to raise up Yeshua's kingdom. Verse 3, "that Yahweh your Elohim will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you, Ruhamah, and gather you again from all the nations where Yahweh your Elohim has scattered you." And so this is what we see. So what we need to redo this slide, but what the blue arrows are supposed to represent is that our forefathers, when the Assyrian dispersion ended, our forefathers, of course, they went all four directions. They went every which way, but as prophetic bodies, They moved north and west by 3 separate migration routes, also coming up the Iberian Peninsula. And they settled in what effectively later became Protestant northwestern Europe. Then from there, after the Protestant Reformation, the Protestant faith was spread around the world. That's what's represented by the, I'm not sure, pink or rose or salmon colored arrows there. And then with the orange arrow, then Protestantism has also come to South America, Esau's country, so to speak. And what we're speaking of here is that we will then be gathered from the very extremities of the earth, and we will come back to the land of Israel after Armageddon. That's what Yahweh's talking about here. Verse 4, if any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under heaven, from there Yahweh your Elohim will gather you, and from there he will bring you. Then Yahweh your Elohim will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. Verse 6, and Yahweh your Elohim will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love Yahweh your Elohim with all of your heart and with all of your soul, that you may live. Also Yahweh your Elohim will put all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you and who persecuted you. And you will again obey the voice of Yahweh and do all his commandments, which I command you today, just like our sister who's thankful that she can do her part. Verse 9, Yahweh your Elohim will make you abound in all the work of your hand, in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, and in the produce of your land for good. For Yahweh will again rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers. Verse 10, if you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim to keep his commandments, brother Judah, and his statutes, not the Talmud, which are written in this book of the Torah. And Ephraim, if you turn to Yahweh your Elohim with all of your heart and with all of your soul to keep his commandments and not just learn about them. Verse 11, for this commandment which I command you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it too far off. It's not in heaven that you should say, oh, we can't get there. We need someone to go to heaven and bring it to us. Then we can hear it and do it. Excuse. Verse 13, nor is it beyond the sea that you should say, no, we need someone to go fetch it to us from a far country. Then we can hear it and do it. Excuse. But the word is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may not just hear it, but actually do it and keep his commandments and not our own version of his commandments. Verse 15, see, I have set before you today life and good and death and evil, and that I command you today to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways, brother Judah, and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments. And I'll say it again for Ephraim, in that I command Ephraim today to love Yahweh your Elohim and to walk in his ways, not just read them. That Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in the land which you go to possess. Verse 17, but if your heart turns away so that you do not hear and are drawn away and worship other Elohim and serve them, or you serve yourself, or you do your own thing, or you do whatever seems good and right in your own eyes, which means that you're worshiping effectively yourself, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to go in and possess. Verse 19, he says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, choose personal responsibility for entering into Torah as a nation, that both you and your descendants may live. Verse 20, that you may love Yahweh your Elohim, that you may obey his voice, meaning do everything that he says to do, and that you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and Yaakov, to give them. So the moral to the story is, if you want to live, then we need to obey everything Yahweh's voice ever said to do, which includes organizing as a nation and entering into covenant as a nation. We're going to see the same theme of the need for obedience to all of Yahweh's commandments in our Haftarah prophetic portion as well. So for the last week, I would just like to say I didn't want to say anything critical of Brother Judah. When I got called to Israel for the whole Mashiach ben Yosef episode, I was just so ready to be blown away by Judah's knowledge of Tanakh, and they just don't. They don't study Tanakh, they study Talmud. So they go off a commentary of 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 a commentary on the Tanakh. And that's how they go through life. So they just simply don't know these things. So I want to be respectful. I want to be loving. Judah is our older brother. But there's a lot of problems. For the last week, we'll take a look at this quotation by Chabad.org. They talk about the 7 degrees of consolation. Again, Judah has this 10-week dance they do every year around the time of Tisha B'Av, where they have 3 weeks of rebuke, where they criticize and scold themselves without ever actually changing anything, without ever actually ditching the Talmud and going back to Tanakh. And then after, for 7 weeks, they console themselves. They pet themselves. They say it's going to be okay. Yahweh will be pleased with us now, even though we're still disobeying all his commandments. And this, in Judah's eyes, qualifies as the rehabilitation of their relationship, even though they take all these verses and snippets out of order, out of sequence, out of context. They don't know what it says. We're going to see that this week. So this week, I'd like to point out just how much of a difference the context makes this week. So this is the last of the 7 weeks. The rabbinical portion is 61 and verse 10. So skip the first 9 verses through 63 and verse 9, and you skip verses 10 to the end. And we're going to see just what a difference that makes this week. So here's a passage. The rabbis have not included this in the portion for Brother Judah. Okay, so don't read here. Okay, if you're Jewish, just plug your ears for a minute. Okay, no reading. It's not this week. Okay, the spirit of Adonai Yahweh is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives. We're talking about Ephraim here. And the opening of prison to those who are bound. This is a very famous passage. Most Nazarene know this. We'll talk about it in a second. To proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh, and then it continues, and the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all who mourn. That's verse 2. That's a 2-part prophecy. Now, what we'll notice here, of course, the rabbis didn't include this in the Haftarah, but come to Luke chapter 4 and verse 16. So Yeshua came to his hometown of Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Now, just for Ephraim, just to give some context, you don't just walk in off the street and read the Haftarah. So you have to, what this tells us is that Yeshua was a regular in his synagogue, because that's what his custom was. And they don't just let anyone read from the Bima. You have to be a respected member of the congregation or an honored guest or something to get the position of standing up to read before the assembly. But notice, Yeshua was involved in his synagogue. Okay, very important to notice that. He was involved in spreading the kingdom in his hometown. So he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read, and he was handed the book of the prophet Yeshayahu. When he'd opened the book, he found the place where it was written, so Yeshayahu 61 and verse 1, the Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, okay, that's talking about Ephraim, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty all those who are spiritually oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh. Now notice, let me back up 2 slides. He didn't say the day of vengeance of our Elohim, because that's coming later. That's not the first century. That's coming soon. Okay, come back forward. Yeah, there we go. Okay, continuity verse. Yeah, there we just had it right there. So this is talking about Ephraim. But if you're rabbinic, you're not allowed to know that. Okay, so verse 3, it says to console those who mourn in Sion. That's probably a reference to Judah. So notice there's two groups being identified here. One is the captives who are being released and set at liberty. The prisoners are being released from that which binds them spiritually. And we're also talking about those who mourn in Sion. That's probably the faithful of brother Judah. To give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the commandment-keeping trees, the planting of Yahweh, that he may be glorified. So we know that Yeshua speaks about men like trees walking. Okay, these are the faithful of brother Judah, the trees of righteousness, the planting of Yahweh. Verse 4. Now, there's differences of interpretation. I believe he's saying together these two groups, both Ephraim's been released and effectively the survivors of Judah, shall rebuild the old ruins. They shall raise up the former desolations. We're talking after Armageddon. They shall repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. There's many different interpretations, but it says strangers, and that's not Gerim, that's Zarim, shall stand and feed your flocks, and the sons of the foreigner shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers. But you shall be named the priests of Yahweh. They shall call you the servants of our Elohim. You shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory you shall boast. And just to say it, that's what's so insulting about this whole B'nai Noach program, is that brother Judah wants to take our tribal identity from us. Basically, they're trying to take our father Joseph's coat away from us because they're denying us our identity. They don't want us to know who we are, so that because scripture says we were Gentiles. Now we are called to be the people of Elohim. Brother Judah doesn't acknowledge that. But verse 7, he's talking about in the end times when Judah and Joseph come together, instead of your shame, you shall have double honor. And instead of confusion, they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore, in their land, they shall possess double. Everlasting joy shall be theirs. We're talking about the millennial reign. For I, Yahweh, love justice. I hate robbery for burnt offering. I will direct their work in truth and will make with them an everlasting covenant. Verse 9, okay, brother Judah, you're still not allowed to read this. This is not part of your portion. Their descendants, so Judah and Joseph, when they come together, shall be known among the Gentile nations and their offspring among the people. All who see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the posterity whom Yahweh has blessed. We're talking about the released Ephraimites. We're talking about the trees of righteousness of brother Judah that survive this whole thing through their obedience. They are the posterity whom Yahweh has blessed. And there's a 90+% washout rate for everyone else who doesn't want to obey him. Now, verse 10, the rabbis say this is where the Haftarah section picks up. So now you miss all that context of who we're talking about. Okay, come to verse 10. I will greatly rejoice in Yahweh. My soul shall be joyful in my Elohim, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation, or Yeshua. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness, meaning commandment keeping. His commandments and not just the easy ones. As a bridegroom decks himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorns herself with jewels. Verse 11, notice this is one of the verses that the rabbis have picked because it consoles. It's a very comforting verse. So it says, for as the earth brings forth its bud, as the garden causes the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so Yahweh Elohim will cause righteousness, following his commandments, and praise to spring forth before all the nations. Come to 62 and verse 1. For Zion's sake, I will not hold my peace. And for Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest until her commandment keeping, until her Torah keeping, until her obedience to all of Yahweh's voice, all of Yahweh's commandments goes forth as brightness, and her salvation as a lamp that burns. Takes people getting involved. Verse 2, the Gentiles shall see your commandment keeping, and all kings your glory, and you shall be called by a new name which the mouth of Yahweh will name. So Judah, verse 3, Judah is, again, these are very comforting verses. He's saying that you're going to be consoled. The only thing that Judah doesn't focus on is that the only ones that are going to be consoled are the ones that go back to keeping his Tanakh. If we don't go back to his word, that's not righteousness, and we won't survive. Okay. Verse 5, if we go back to his Tanakh and we survive, he says, verse 5, for as a young man marries a virgin, so your sons shall marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your Elohim rejoice over you. So very comforting. Drop down to verse 11. Indeed, Yahweh has proclaimed to the end of the world, say to the daughter of Zion. You can easily argue Judah here. You can also argue Ephraim. Surely your salvation is coming. Behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him. And they shall call them, this is probably Judah and Joseph together that qualify as the daughters of Zion. They shall call them the set apart people, the redeemed of Yahweh. And you shall be, and Judah, at least, or Jerusalem shall be called sought out, a city not forsaken. So now we come to chapter 63, and people say, what are you talking about? The need to obey, or 90% of Ephraim is going to die. Okay, well, let's talk about this. We're going to load you up with a lot of information. So for Judah, the first 9 verses are still part of the parashah, and then Judah will drop off after 9 verses, but we'll keep going because we want the greater overall context. So we're talking about Elohim in Yeshayahu 63 and verse 1. It says, who is this who comes from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. And we're speaking about Elohim here. This is the day of vengeance. He says, I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. He said, okay, what does this have to do with the destruction of 90% of the house of Ephraim and probably more than that of the house of Judah? All right, well, let's load you up with a bunch of information and we'll discuss it. So come to Wikipedia, just search for Edom, and this is the top matter there. So Edom literally means red in Hebrew. Okay, so they drop down, they have a map. And it's important to know the geography because we can see that the kingdom of Edom is south of modern day Israel. And if we take a look at the geography, the western 2/3 of the kingdom of Edom are in what today would be southern Israel. And then the eastern 1/3 in southern Jordan. And that's important data to know because it impacts how we can safely interpret these prophecies or not. Now, as we spoke about in the Revelation studies, Esav is Edom, who is also the red horse, and he hates Jacob. He hates both Judah and Joseph. He's still mad. And now we speak about it in the Revelation study. So Esav, another name for Esav is Edom. He's also called Duma and sometimes referred to by Seir because Mount Seir is where he would worship. In the modern day manifestations of the red horse, we're talking about a populist horse, a chaos horse. We're talking about what seems good and right in our own eyes. So you've got Catholicism because they're trying to create a broad, easy road for worshiping Elohim. The broader and easier, the better. You're also talking about any kind of populist democracy or voting. Marxism, socialism, communism, those are all manifestations or expressions of the red horse spirit. And as we've mentioned before, Esav is presently located in Vatican City, effectively. He's Yeah, he's part of the Catholic Church. So the red horse, Esav, the problem is that the white horse, Joseph, we spent times, and half a time, 1,260 years inside Esav. So the Pope still pretends to be white horse, but he's not white horse. It's a deception operation. Okay. We have a lot more discussion on this in the Revelation study. We don't have time to unpack it all here, but you have what Yeshua calls the 3 measures of Babylonian meal. So you have 3, and meal is ground or denatured seed. So you have 3 measures of denatured Abrahamic seed. So you have Christianity per se, Judaism, and Islam. They all attempt to imitate the Abrahamic worship or the correct worship of Elohim, but all of them miss it. And the role of that, because that's the chief center core role right now, is the Esavite role, the red horse role in the middle. We talk about it in more detail in the Revelation study. So Esav right now is a problem. He's causing trouble. And then here we have in Yeshayahu 63, starting in verse 1, this is the day of vengeance that we read about in 61 and verse 2. Now it's 2 chapters later, and this is the vengeance. So it says, who is this who comes from Edom, from Red Horse Country, with dyed garments from Basra, this one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength? So Elohim responds, I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Well, okay, why is your apparel red? I thought Yeshua showed up in white. Why is your apparel red and your garments like one who treads in the winepress? Verse 3 says, I have trodden the winepress alone. And there's plenty of quotations about the day of vengeance and the blood of grapes. And from the peoples, no one was with me. For I have trodden them in my anger and trampled them in my fury. Their blood is sprinkled upon my garments, and I have stained all my robes. They're no longer white, they're red. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. We can see why Judah would want to include this in the Haftarah. Verse 5, he says, I looked, but there was no one to help, and I wondered that there was no one to uphold. Therefore, my own arm, Yeshua, brought salvation for me, and my own fury, it sustained me. I have trodden down the peoples in my anger, made them drunk in my fury, and brought down their strength to the earth. Verse 7. I will mention the loving kindnesses of Yahweh. Now, notice the shift. Notice the shift at verse 7. We've got a different aspect. It says, I will mention the loving kindnesses of Yahweh and the praises of Yahweh, according to all that Yahweh has bestowed on us, and the great goodness toward the house of Israel, Joseph, which he has bestowed on them, on the survivors, according to his mercies, according to the multitude of his loving kindnesses. Verse 8, for he said, surely they, this isn't Judah, we're talking about Joseph, surely they are my people, children who will not lie. So he became their savior. In all their affliction he was afflicted, and the messenger of his presence saved them, and in his love and in his pity he redeemed them, and he bore them and carried them all the days of old. Okay, now, if you're following the rabbinical portion, you stop here. Okay, so we've mentioned in verse 7, we've mentioned the house of Israel, but now we're just cutting right here at verse 9. So we'll come to verse 10. Okay, so Judah, you have to plug your ears now. He says, but they rebelled and grieved his set-apart spirit. Is it Judah? Is it Joseph? Is it both? So he turned himself against them as an enemy. Well, it's not very comforting. You see why Judah has edited this out? And he fought against them because they were being rebellious. Can you see why Judah has edited this out? Verse 11, then he remembered the days of old, Moshe and his people, saying, where is he, Elohim, who brought them up out of the sea with the shepherd of his flock? Where is he who put his set-apart spirit within them? Verse 12. Who led them by the right hand of Moshe, with his glorious arm, Yeshua, dividing the waters before them, in both houses, to make for himself an everlasting name, who led them, all 12 tribes, through the deep, as a horse in the wilderness, that they might not stumble. Verse 14, as a beast goes down into the valley, and the Spirit of Yahweh causes him to rest, so you lead your people to make for yourself a glorious name. Look down from heaven and see from your habitation, set apart and glorious. Where are your zeal and your strength, the yearning of your heart and your mercies toward me? Are they restrained? Okay, we could discuss who this is over. To me, this sounds more like Ephraim speaking. Verse 16, doubtless you are our father, though Abraham was ignorant of us, or he didn't know us because we hadn't been born yet, and Israel does not acknowledge us. This has to be speaking of Ephraim because they're saying Judah, Israel, does not acknowledge us. So, you, O Yahweh, are our Father. Our Redeemer from everlasting is your name. 17. Yahweh, why have you made us stray from your ways and hardened our heart from your fear? Return for your servant's sake the tribes of your inheritance. To me, that sounds more like Ephraim. Verse 18, your set-apart people have possessed it but a little while. Our adversaries have trodden down your sanctuary, and we have become like those of old, over whom you never ruled, those who were never called by your name. To me, that sounds like the punishment over Ephraim. So people say, well, where is the destruction of the 90% of the house of Ephraim in this? Okay, well, very good question. I know we've watched these two short video clips before. Let's watch them again, and we're going to load you up with some more information or discuss that some more.
And therefore, Chazal tell us in the Gemara Megillah that the relationship between Rome and Klal Yisrael is that Kishazeh kam zenoifel. That if somebody were to say Jerusalem is built and Caesarea is built, don't believe them. If anybody says they both lay in ruins, don't believe them. It's either one or the other. Either the Jewish people rule or the Romans rule. Because it's one melucha, it's one power. Never shall they both rule the world. Edom, Rome. Who is Rome today? Italy. The United States is considered the spiritual heir of Rome. Western culture is the spiritual heir of Edom of Rome. Rome. United States of America.
So I think I said before that they had a false ID going on with these videos, that the United States of America is not Esav per se, but that it is rather the land of Babylon of Jeremiah 15:51. But what I realized watching this, doing research for this week's parashah about 2 days ago, Yahweh showed me that both IDs are correct. It's effectively a double ID. So let's watch this video again, also try and glean things, and then we'll show you why they're both correct.
Once Edom is destroyed, along with its false Messiah, then and only then can Israel rise, and Messiah ben David can gather the exiles and build the third temple. Erev Shabbat is the end of the 6th millennia, which we are currently in, and Edom must be destroyed, and the false Messiah must be completely exposed, and once that happens, then the real one actually comes, and then Jerusalem can be built properly. When this one falls, the other rises. Israel and Rome can never stand at the same time, which is why I told you, why did he hang on Friday Eve, Erev Shabbat? Because that is to show you that at the end of days, Christianity will be no more, and then finally Israel will rise. Israel and Rome can never stand at the same time. They are opposites, Jacob, Israel, and Esav, Edom. And when the false Messiah falls, the other, the real Messiah, will rise. It is already known that Israel's greatest enemy is Edom. And God turned things around so that the Netzer Nitav, the despicable descendant, and the filth of wicked Esav, who is their God, would be buried in Israel, in Jerusalem. This is why Jesus was actually buried in Jerusalem. The reason for this is that even the enemies of God should pray for the city of God, which is Jerusalem, where their God, Jesus, was buried. Yes, I said buried, because this causes an evil angel to say amen against his will. You see, this is the fast one that God actually pulled on Satan, when all those who follow Satan think that they're pulling a fast one on God. They sing psalms for the restoration of Jerusalem and the gathering of Israel to Zion, and they have no idea that they are actually praying for the establishment of the holy in the world and the destruction of their very religion. So, thank you. We accept all your prayers. The Kalippah over here that is going to be destroyed, the Kalippah, as I said, even in my story, this is Jesus. This is the New Testament. This is the church and everything that comes with it or out of it and every variation from it.
So while I was preparing for the Parashah this week, Yahweh showed me that they are in fact correct. The United States is Esav, or at least part of Esav. They don't have all the details down. And I don't believe I've had time to put this down in a study. And there's also been 3 major downloads Yahweh gave me about a year and a half ago now that I haven't had time to put down in study format. So Father willing, after the Parashah series, we want to cover it. But the United States is one aspect of Esav. So if you have read the Revelation study or seen Revelation Simplified on YouTube, I can't remember if this is included, if this is one of those things that we still have to get down in study format. But there are what are known as the 3 cities of empires, called by different names. Sometimes it's called the Empire of the City. But you have 3 main cities that control effectively the Western Judeo-Christian, at least the Christian world. So you have Rome, which is the spiritual capital. Then you have the city of London, which is the financial capital of Esav. Then you have Washington, D.C., which is the military capital of Esav. So that's why it's correct to say that Esav lives in Rome. It's also correct to say that Esav lives in Washington, D.C. One thing that the Orthodox Jewish presenters may not be aware of is that the city of London and Zira's financial capital is also part of Esav. So we say this, there's a book, it's a relatively short book, The Empire of the City, The Secret History of British Zira Financial Power. So there's the book there if you want to purchase it on Amazon. Here's some extracts from some of the things I've seen around the internet. So you have 3 effectively what are called obelisks of Osiris. Sometimes they're called Cleopatra's Needle, and there are many obelisks of Osiris and many Cleopatra's Needles. But with these 3, these show up in 3 special cities that are cities within cities that operate not under the constitutions of the land, but they operate under ancient Roman law called Lex Fori. So all 3 of these are effectively Esav because all 3 of these are effectively Roman. So you have first in the Vatican, you have the obelisk of Osiris there in the Vatican itself. Then the financial capital is the inner city of London inside of London. So there's a 1 square mile financial capital that effectively runs the finances of the world because of Zira. And then you have Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., which also operates under Lex Fori, and they're the military arm. So if you don't have time for a 112-page book, if you go on YouTube, there's a video, The Empire of the City, 3 city-states. I would look for that one. Propagander is the handle. So that is about a 6-minute video. And then also bear in mind with our study on America, the land of Babylon, we show that America is the land of Mystery Babylon in Jeremiah 50 and 51. Now we know that it's also the military capital of Esav with the three cities of empire. And one of the things, I just don't have time to unpack it here. We've got a long parashah as it is. But if you have time, compare the destructions, compare the passages. So you have Jeremiah 49, 7 through 22 is the judgment on Edom or Esav. Also, Isaiah 34 is the judgment on Edom or Esav. And then compare that to Jeremiah 50 and 51, which is the judgment on the land of Babylon. And I think you'll see many, many similarities there. But with the destruction of Esav, and this is what people, I think, just don't understand. So we're talking about both a physical Esav being destroyed. We're also talking about a spiritual Esav being destroyed, because Esav is what effectively props up the mystery Babylonian system. Without the mystery Babylonian system, Esav can't function. Esav can't operate. So Yahweh is going to destroy Esav, because Esav doesn't value Yahweh, doesn't value the things of Yahweh. So here we have in Yirmiyahu 49 and verse 9, it says, if grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? Or if thieves by night, would they not destroy everything until they have enough? He says, but I have made Esav bare. I mean, and there's several verses, he's going to destroy Esav. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His descendants are plundered, his brethren and his neighbors, and he is no more. So put all that together. I leave that for you for a home study on Shabbat. Father willing, we can talk about that more when we get to the documentary series. Just again, a quick note. Right now, we are at seal 6. It's a long way to go to the tribulation, and it's at trumpet 7 that Babylon will fall. The 7 cups or the bowl judgments, those are relatively quick. And then we come to Armageddon. After Armageddon, that's when comes the ingathering. But that's more than 27 years from now. So in the Torah portion, we saw that Yahweh commands all of us, the entire nation, from the greatest to the least of us, from the head to the toe, from the tip to the tail. He wants us to organize as a nation with offices of government. And as we will see in the Brit Chadasha, or the renewed covenant portion, things are no different. We are outside the land, but there's still a requirement to order and organize ourselves. We're still a nation, even if we don't yet have a country. Okay, so let's proceed. Now, it's very interesting. Yeshua's form of kingdom is not based on domination, it's based upon service. So we come to Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 24, and our forerunners were having a fleshly dispute about which one of them would be considered the greatest, instead of just getting in there and serving and letting the Spirit figure it out. So Yeshua said to them, now the kings of the Gentiles are the ones. They exercise lordship over the people. They're involved in the alpha male dominance hierarchy. And those who exercise authority, top-down control over them, are called benefactors. Joke. Verse 26, but not so among you. On the contrary, among my people, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the one who is the younger or the lesser, and let him who governs or rules or directs, let him be as one who serves. He says, for who is greater in the physical realm? Is it the one who sits at the table and is served, or is it the one who serves? Isn't it the one who sits at the table and is served? Isn't he considered more important in the physical realm? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. I am among you as the waiter. I am among you as the butler. Well, yet there's still order. So it's a different kind of order. It's an order in the hearts of those people who love Elohim and want to see his kingdom established here on this earth. So we notice from before other studies in Luke chapter 9 and verse 14, Yeshua is still using the orders of tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands that was suggested to Moshe by Yitro. So he says, make them sit down in groups of 50. So there's still organization. There's still order. We come to Luke 22 and verse 28. As we said, Yeshua tells us that you are those who have continued with me in my trials. So it's going to be difficult. So you've got to love Elohim enough to go through his trials with him, giving tithes, offering time, trying to build his kingdom. Now, notice what he says, verse 29, he says, and I bestow upon you a kingdom, meaning it's going to be run in a spiritual military manner, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, wouldn't that be nice to eat and drink at Yeshua's table in his kingdom? But what do we have to do in order to eat and drink at Yeshua's table in his kingdom? Well, look, we're receiving a kingdom, meaning we need to order ourselves as a spiritual military order, where those who serve give the directions, because that's how Yeshua's kingdom works. Come to Acts chapter 1 and verse 6, when the apostles had come together, they asked Yeshua, saying, Adon, will you at this time restore the kingdom to the house of Israel, or Ephraim, or Joseph? And Yeshua says, don't worry about the times and the seasons. Just worry about doing what I tell you to do. Just worry about operating according to the healthy protocols, and my kingdom will build itself. You don't have to worry about timelines. You don't have to worry about schedules. All you have to do is worry about maintaining a connection with the vine. And once you've got that connection in the vine, never, ever to let it go under any circumstances, no matter how hard it gets. And if you get thrown, to get right back into that connection. And this is what will build my kingdom. That's what I want you to do. So there were mixed communities in the terms of outreach, but notice you still had Hebrews leading, and the Hellenists or the Reform or the less Hebraic believers could attend, but they didn't teach. Now, in terms of organization, and again, I don't know how many messianic leaders and teachers I've spoken this to, but all these people that you meet and you say to them, if we're going to keep the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints, shouldn't it look like the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints? You never get an answer back. You never get an answer on that. But let's take a look. What did it look like? You had the Hebrews in charge teaching the Hellenists. And verse 2, the 12 summoned the multitude of disciples and said, there's a third tithe issue. The widows, orphans, and the poor are not being taken care of. But it's not desirable that we should leave the word of Elohim and serve tables. It's not desirable that we leave the first tithe ministry to fulfill the third tithe ministry. The third tithe ministry, that's still very important, but so is the first tithe ministry. It's not desirable that we should leave one or the other. We need to fulfill both the first tithe and the third tithe ministries. So therefore, verse 3, brethren, seek out from among yourselves 7 men of good reputation, full of the set-apart spirit and wisdom, that we may appoint over the third tithe business. Notice they're taking care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and the stranger inside their own communities. Okay, brothers and sisters, are we doing that? Right now, we had earlier we had a very nice, respectful letter saying there's people all over, they want to serve, they want to enter in, they want to worship. Well, here's your chance. Okay, let's enter into relationship with Yeshua. Here's our chance. And if we will do that and come together as a nation, not only will the third tithe ministry to the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger being taken care of, but you'll also have support for your first tithe ministry. And Judah, again, understands the benefit of having a standing priesthood, saying prayer day and night. Ephraim doesn't seem to understand this. There's a very strong anarchistic streak in Ephraim. Ephraim seems to think, I have a relationship with Yahweh, that's it, I'm good. Or I have a relationship, my family has a relationship, we're good. Or In a good case, my family is good. I know several other families. We're all good, and we're in this together, and that's it. We don't need anyone else. Well, that's not good. It takes everyone all working together, from the greatest of us to the least of us, from the tip to the tail. And the disciples say, verse 4, with the third tithe ministry covered, we need to give ourselves continually to prayer and the ministry of the word, just like as in the Levitical order. You need a standing priesthood, and it takes support in order to do that. Do people understand the benefits of having a standing priesthood? Well, Judah does. Let's pray that Ephraim might learn. I can't remember why I put this slide in here. I just wanted to show that within the body of belief in Yeshua in the first century, we still had several different groups. So you had the Min HaNetzarim, originally Jewish, black horse. They went to recover lost Joseph, or the white horse. Then you have the believing Pharisees, which would be your one house messianic Jews of today. They lost the debate in Acts 15. And then you have various groups of Christians, effectively. You have your Hellenists, who became Christianos, or Christians. Then you have your Messianistics, or your Messianics, who, they're learning, they're studying, they're good, they don't have to obey. No, the commandments in Torah, they don't apply to them. Oh no, not them. Oh no, and they won't be among the 90% that perish, because according to them, the drunkards are going to be included with the sober. All right, enough said. Brothers, sisters, there's all kinds of order and organization proclaimed in the renewed covenant. If we're not practicing this order and organization, are we practicing the faith once delivered to the saints? Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 19 tells us that we are no longer strangers and foreigners to the nation of Israel, but rather, since we are grafting into the Jewish root, we are now become fellow citizens with the saints and the members of the household of Elohim. Israel, verse 20, says, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yeshua HaMashiach himself being the chief cornerstone. What does that mean? Okay, well, if we take a look, what we see is, according to the analogy, we're supposed to have a single organization. It's not a bunch of scattered stones. It's a bunch of carefully arranged stones that are all in connection with each other, with the stronger stones down toward the bottom because they can support more weight. That's the whole idea. It's also important to note that we have the foundation of apostles and prophets on the bottom, because the apostles and prophets, by definition, are the two classes of giftings that can hear and speak according to Yahweh's voice. So they effectively form quality control. And, the problem is, you need to have this foundation of apostles and prophets, because what you get so often is what we call rogue evangelists, rogue pastors, rogue teachers, or sometimes even rogue apostles. They'll go and establish their own organizations, their own ministries, their own things. They're doing their own thing. They're not doing what Yeshua said to do. They're not building Yeshua's kingdom. They're building their own alternative kingdoms. What a shame that is, because they're going to pay. Well, that's up to Yahweh how they pay. But the point is, we're trying to build a single unified ministry kingdom worldwide. And when we have other ministry leaders and teachers starting seminaries, starting ministries, starting newsletters, starting TV shows, but they're not building on the original doctrine. They're building separate nations. They're fragmenting the body. And it's so bad, most people think that's the way it's supposed to be. And it's completely backwards. Verse 21 says, in whom the whole building being fitted together globally, worldwide, from the least of us to the greatest of us, from the one who cuts our wood and draws our water to the leaders and chiefs, including all of the families, everyone all together is supposed to grow into a single unified set apart living temple in Yahweh. It says, in whom you all, plural, also are being built together for a dwelling place of Elohim in the Spirit. And what that speaks of, brothers and sisters, is one single ministry for Yeshua worldwide. Not, this is my ministry, or fill your name here ministries, or make up a random word ministries. Okay, we're not supposed to make up our own ministries. We are supposed to submit to Yeshua's Spirit and then submit one to another in the Spirit, so that together we can form his one singular ministry. And please pray with us that the 10% that want to do that will be identified. But notice in verse 22, it says, in whom you all also, plural, are being built together. We look that up. This is Esword, Ephesians chapter 2. And if you can see that there, so it gives plural second person. So again, that's you all, the Southerners Parashat here. So Acts chapter 6 in verse 2, again, it's not desirable to leave the word of Elohim. You need a standing priesthood. You need prayers and offerings made in intercession for the people, or Elohim is not pleased, because Elohim calls us into covenant as an ordered nation, and the king, the priest, and the prophet are those roles. You need a standing priesthood. It's essential if you're going to be his people. You also need your third tithe ministry. So there's many different analogies. We've taken a look at this one before. But again, it's one living organism. It's one vine. It's one olive tree. We graft into the root Yeshua, but there has to be an exchange. There has to be, Yeshua is going to push up nutrients and moisture and sap, and the trunk is going to carry the sap back and forth. There's got to be an interchange between all parts of the tree in order for the tree to stay alive. If there's not a healthy interchange, we become withered as a branch and then are cast out and are thrown into the fires of tribulation and are burned. And that's not the place any one of us want to be. Now, regarding order and organization, we know that in the order of Levi, you had the Levitical order, and then you had other duties. You had judges and officers in all of your gates. In the dispersion, it's a different story. So now Yeshua is taking his Jewish apostles and he's sending them out after lost Joseph, after lost Ephraim. Everyone's different, but still you have these same roles to fulfill. It just looks different because it's in the dispersion. So it says Acts 4. All right, we're going to have to get that slide corrected. It should be Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 11. And he himself, so Yeshua himself, gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some pastors, and some teachers. Why did he do that? How long did he do that? Are we still supposed to be doing that? Or is that all old? Is that all first century stuff? He says, it's for the equipping of the set apart ones for the work of ministry. Okay, do we still need to do that? Yes, we do. It's for the edifying or the building up of the body of Mashiach. Do we still need to edify? Do we still need to build up the body of Mashiach? Yes, we do. Verse 13. How long is it supposed to last for? It's supposed to last until we all come to the unity of the faith and to the knowledge of the Son of Elohim, to become perfect men, meaning we're walking out the Torah perfectly, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Mashiach, meaning we have become like Mashiach. We have imitated him to the point that we now walk like him. And why are we doing this? That we should no longer be children, spiritual children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine, looking for someone to do things for us, looking to set up new orders and new organizations, coming up with new plans to build the stick of Joseph, the stick of Ephraim. Okay, and that's called the trickery of men. That's called the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. And that's exactly what you're looking at when you're looking at these messianic ministries and ministers. Because they're telling you, they're teaching you Torah, and they're doing anything but. Because they're not teaching you to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, unifying on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, I'll guarantee you they've got some other plan. They've got some other routine. They've got some other regimen that they're teaching, and yet they're holding it out as if it's Yeshua's Torah, as if it's renewed covenant Torah, and it's not. And that's how you know it's Mystery Babylon in disguise, is because it pretends to be the worship of Elohim. It pretends to follow the instructions of Elohim, but it doesn't actually. So what's the solution, brethren? Verse 15 tells us the solution is to speak the truth in love, not to withhold, not to refrain from speaking the truth out of love, but to actually speak the truth in love. Sometimes love is hard. Sometimes love hurts. Sometimes if you love someone, you need to get in their face and tell them why and how and where they are wrong. Why? So that we all may grow up in all things into him who is the head, meaning Mashiach. We're trying to become like him. Now, was Yeshua stingy? Did Yeshua keep everything to himself, or did Yeshua share what he had? Verse 16, it says, and we have the whole body will be joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. Every cell in a living body has to perform a function, or it's dead, it needs to get cut out. It becomes a cancer. Every cell in a living tree, in a living organism, has to contribute to the growth of that organism. So that's why, brethren, in the renewed covenant times, we need to be joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. That's what the grateful sister was doing. She's so thankful. I'm part of the organism. I can give my contribution and I belong to the organism, confirming my covenant with Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. She's so happy for this. And then with respect, we have other brethren who don't yet understand this responsibility. They don't yet understand that it's like, I'm part of this living organism. I've got to contribute to it. I can't be a parasite. I can't be a cancer. I can't let other people do all the work and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy myself. It doesn't work like that, not in Elohim's kingdom. You can get away with that in the world. You can get a government job. You can find easy jobs. You can find all kinds of ways to get money in the temporal realm. But don't try treating Yahweh like a thing of the world. He doesn't like it. What he likes is when everyone he has called does their fair share. So they all supply, and this causes the growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love, meaning the organism works together to grow. This works whether you talk about barley plant, you're talking about wheat, you're talking about a lion, you're talking about whatever, a sheep, whatever kind of animal we're talking about. All of the cells in that organism need to work together for the edifying of itself in love. Now, I want to ask people so many questions and I don't know how to ask them. I guess that what I really want to know is, do people believe these prophecies? Do people believe what they're reading? Or are they looking for a cheap, inexpensive way to get a bunch of blessings where they don't have to contribute and do their fair share? They don't have to do their part. It just seems like there's a lot of people who are looking for some kind of a way to get out of doing their part. And they try and shift the responsibility on us. They try and shift the blame on someone else. But real life is when real people take real responsibility for themselves and their lives and their actions and their behavior. And that's what we need in the house of Ephraim. Now, you need leaders, brethren. We're expecting growth in a year or two. We don't know who the leaders are going to be. We don't know who the elders are going to be that will serve the people. When we have more elders, there will be many more functions. So the brother asks respectfully, he says, where do you all meet? And the answer is, we have so few people right now, and I have special duties. I've got Yahweh's given me marching orders. I don't have time to run a standard fellowship. But we're looking because we know the need exists. You need not just apostles, not just prophets, but you also need evangelists, pastors, and teachers. So, but we're having a hard time finding people who want to meet the requirements. There's people who want the jobs, but they don't want to meet the requirements. And that's very difficult for us because we can't just lay hands on anyone. We have to know you. So I guess we have to, myself, we have to read the prophecies, understand the prophecies, know what the prophecies say, and then we have to step out in faith that Yahweh is real and his word is there, and he's always been there for us. We're stepping out in faith again. We know we're going to grow here in a year or two, but we don't know who the leaders are. We don't know who the elders and the deacons and the servants are. And we ask you please to pray with us that they would identify themselves through their fruit, through their actions. Now, there's such important work to do. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, Shaliach tells us that this is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of an elder, he desires a good work. Okay, now, is there anyone in the house of Ephraim who wants to do a good work? Here's the standards. He must be blameless. He's got to be an example to the flock. He's a husband of one wife. We're not listening to arguments about, well, if there's extenuating circumstances, but in general, we don't do plural marriage here. It's permissible in the land of Israel, but it's not an ideal. Therefore, you can't give them an elder role because the elder role is an example role. You have to be temperate, sober-minded, good behavior, able to teach. It's so important. There's so many people that don't understand what's going on. You have to be able to help people leave Esau's sphere and come into Joseph's sphere. You have to help them leave the red horse and come to white horse. Okay, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, one who rules his own house well. Now, ideally, an elder should be married with his children raised and in submission. That's not necessarily a dead-end road. If you're single and want to serve as an elder, we will take it on a case-by-case basis. But we can't modify the doctrine because the doctrine isn't ours. The doctrine is Yeshua's. If there's something wrong with our doctrine, brethren, please tell us. If you can find something wrong with the doctrine, please send us a loving email, and we want to correct it. Because the house of Ephraim has to come together in unity, and there has to be a single point of doctrine, or there isn't a single nation. So please help us. If you are a person who is interested in doing a good work for Elohim, please take that good work seriously. Now, I shouldn't be a novice. We have to be very careful around the pride issue. We've had several people lie to us, tell us things that are not true, and he must have a good testimony from those who are outside. Verse 8, deacons also are in an example role. That's why you have to hold them to the highest standards. That's why they need to hold to the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. In verse 10, you need to test them to make sure that their conscience is pure. Then, if they show themselves to be blameless, then you can entrust the sheep into their care, but it's not a quick process. Likewise, there's also standards for their wives, and they're in an example role, so they should only have one wife. There's exceptions to the rule. If you think that applies to you, write us, we'll talk about it. But notice verse 13, brothers, for those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith, which is in Mashiach Yeshua. Can we compare that to the reward that's coming for these messianic ministry leaders and teachers who are setting up alternate kingdoms? People want to have a ministry that teaches messianic standards, which is a broad, easy road. We have seminaries. We have yeshivot. We have all sorts of organizations, all sorts of ministers and ministries. Brothers, who wants to be a deacon in Yeshua's kingdom? Who wants to be a doorkeeper in the house of our Elohim? Was not enough to be a good servant in good standing and have great boldness in the faith? Is not enough to want to do the good work of an elder in Yeshua's true kingdom? We have to set up our own kingdom. We have to come up with a mixed assembly where you don't have Nazarenes in charge, but you have Messianics teaching and in charge, setting up other kingdoms. How does this follow the principle and precept of Yahweh calling us all into covenant together? Well, we see many requirements in the renewed covenant that we continue to operate as a single nation in all countries, and that we unify and hold to order and structure. Even though we're not physically located together, we still need to operate on a single foundation of apostles and prophets. And the separated priesthood is to appoint elders in every city, wherever there is an elder who desires to do a good work. Is there anyone that have their own ministry, setting up their own kingdom, and they'd like to cash that in on being a true elder for Yeshua? Titus 1 and verse 7, for an elder must be blameless as a steward of Elohim. That's what you're doing, is you're guiding the sheep in the correct direction. You're not doing your own thing. You're not self-willed. You're not quick-tempered, not given to wine, but a lover of what is good, a lover of what is just, a lover of what is set apart, a lover of Yeshua's kingdom. You want to help set up Yeshua's kingdom. Verse 9, holding fast to the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict those who contradict. Now, why? Let's take a look. Verse 10, he says, for there are many who are insubordinate. That was in the first century. Today, there's almost nothing but rebels. There's both idle talkers and deceivers in the first century, especially those of the circumcision. Remember, they were going into mixed synagogue environments at this point. Verse 11, whose mouths must be stopped. That's why you need to know sound doctrine, is so that you can stop the mouths of those who contradict. Does anyone want that job? Brethren, I hope I've done a good job. Probably there's some things that have left yet unpacked. It's been a long parashah. We don't have time to cover all the details. But the thing I want to leave you with is that we are in the driver's seat. Judah has already formed a stick. Now it's Joseph's turn to form a stick in the hand of Ephraim. Well, it is a lot of information. We've talked about a lot of things, but whether we're interested in becoming part of the priesthood or serving as a deacon or an elder, or even if we just want to be a good sheep, the solution is still found in Jude 1 and verse 3, which tells us that even though we're both saved, we're all saved. Nobody's arguing that we're saved. Nobody's arguing you didn't hear from Yeshua. Nobody's saying Yeshua didn't call you. Okay, what we're saying is, in order to respond to Yeshua, to where Yeshua is going to be happy, we need to develop a kingdom mindset. We need to establish the kingdom first. And that's why it's necessary to practice the singular faith that was once for all of us delivered to the saints, because that's the only way it builds Yeshua's unified kingdom. As we've mentioned many times before, the ball is now in our court. Judah has taken a stick for himself. Now it's time for Joseph to take a stick for himself so that we can be joined together with the stick of Judah. And not only that, but also to move Judah to jealousy, because our stick will be more biblical and more Tanakh-like than their stick. The living tree of Joseph, the living tree of Ephraim, is going to look a lot more like an olive tree than what brother Judah has got going. and that will move Judah to jealousy. Brethren, help us make this a reality. If people will involve themselves in Yeshua's framework, I have been studying Yeshua's framework for the past 25 years, and I can present to you the results of my research. It's up to you, if you love Yahweh, if you want to serve him, if you're not looking for excuses to get out of serving him, but you truly want to serve him, you truly want to do your part, like the sister who's glad to know what she's supposed to be doing. Brethren, there's so much we can do. We have seen organizations that have come up and have done great things to advance the faith. They haven't come to the same theological position as Nazarene Israel, but now it's Nazarene Israel's time. Now it's time to formulate the stick of Joseph. And the only thing that can do that is selflessness. The only thing that can do that is involving ourselves in Yeshua's kingdom. Brethren, we have a plan for this. Look at our plan. And if you have a better plan, then please tell us what is wrong with our plan. If you have a better doctrine for gathering the house of Ephraim together and fulfilling scripture prophecy according to the word of Elohim, please let us know what it is. But this is our plan. This is what we hope to do for the movement. Now, it's especially important for us. This is something I wanted to share before, but when I was in Jerusalem, from 5763 to 5765, or 2003 to 2005, I met with any rabbi that would talk with me. There was one rabbi who was particularly helpful. He didn't mean to be, but he was. So I will withhold his name, but he said something very interesting and very, very important. He said, there will never be a time when the rabbis do not need to oppose you. I thought about that, prayed about that for years. There will never be a time when the rabbis do not need to oppose you. And of course, there will never be a time. Because why? Because the rabbis are Talmudic. And the rabbis don't want Joseph to come home because Joseph is a prophet. They want Joseph to come home, but they want him to convert to Talmudism. We can't convert to Talmudism. Talmudism erases our heritage as Joseph. So the rabbis want the wrong thing. The rabbis want Talmud and not Tanakh. The rabbis want their own commandments, the commandments and teachings of men, instead of the commandments and teachings of Elohim. So, of course, there will never be a time when the rabbis do not need to oppose us. But it's the funny thing. They want Joseph to come home. They just don't want Joseph to come home because of Yeshua. But that's too bad, because as we obey Yeshua, we will build his kingdom. We will build the stick of Joseph. We will reestablish the Tabernacle of David. And those of us, the 10%, who will seek his kingdom first, we're going to be preserved, because we will be called back to White Horse Joseph. And the rest of the Messianic world, which is waiting to be served, which is sitting on their thrones, waiting to be served, they will become reckoned as Esav. So that's quite a note. Brethren, I'd like to ask your prayers. I would like to ask you, please, to pray that we all take serious stock of where we are in these end times. And I would ask that we please pray that we will take a stick and we will obey Elohim's word, and we will establish this stick like we're supposed to make the stick, according to the words written in the renewed covenant. And the amazing thing about this is, not only does it show us the 10% of Joseph who truly believes his word, it's also the very best witness that we can make to Judah. Because when Judah sees that we are coming back home because of Yeshua, what kind of a witness is that going to be? When Judah sees Joseph come back because of faith in Messiah Yeshua, when they see the stick of Joseph forming, how can they deny that, brethren? And in the documentary series, we also hope to show how that is going to set Israel up for strategic advantage during the millennium. So for a great many reasons, whether we are in the Levitical order or in the order of kings and priests, that's why both the Torah of Moshe and the renewed covenant require an organized nation, because it's Elohim's will, because he's building a single nation and not a whole bunch of competing little tiny fiefdoms. So if anyone is interested in serving Elohim, in pleasing Elohim, recognize the truth of these words that we're saying. If you have objections to the doctrine, write us. Let us know what's wrong with the doctrine. But brethren, if you don't have objections to the doctrine, then enter into the covenant, because it takes all of us. It takes a nation to serve Elohim the way Elohim wants to be served. So I thank you for joining us. May Yahweh please be with you, and may he lead all of us to make the necessary sacrifices to make his son's kingdom a reality and to make it come true. Please, let's all do our part so the house of Joseph can come home. Shabbat Shalom.